Okay, so continuing where we left off from the previous video, I've basically removed two of the three images and kept the first one, and I've named the variable button image. So button image is an image game object. And I'd like to now start working towards having an actual button that can be clicked, basically, having some kind of interactivity with this image. To do that in Phaser, we call set interactive on the game object, which passes it to the input manager to enable it for input. Now you can continue reading the description and basically noting that there are three arguments that it could take. But basically, if no arguments are provided for the hit area, you can see that it will try and create a rectangular hit area based on the texture frame the game object is using. So in our case, basically, what that means is that the entire button image becomes the hit area. So if I were to go to Figma and I've taken a screenshot of the button, right? You can imagine that once you enable it for interactivity, that there's this invisible hit area, this rectangular hit area over the button that you can now click on, basically. That's all that's doing, right? And we could pass this in ourselves. So we could make it such that, I don't know, for some reason, half the button can be clicked. There will be nothing when you click on the other side. It won't trigger the event, which will be handling right next. But yeah, by default, it will cover the texture that the image is using. So that's step number one, right? We set interactive on the game object. Now, step two, I'm going to demo how to react to the event pointer down, right? So if I uncomment this code, I'm doing over here, I'm doing button image.on, and I'm passing in this string, the game object pointer down. I'm passing in, basically I'm referencing it from Phaser, and what this ends up being, if you find it in the source code, is it ends up being this string pointer down, okay? So if I were to control click on this, it will take me to its type definition, which is a string, but if you wanted to actually find this, you'd need to find the equivalent. So you can see here it's Phaser input events. If I were to go to under node modules, find Phaser source input and events, you can find it somewhere down here. Basically, it's a game object. Where was it pointer down? And that's the one, pointer down. So basically, in here, then there's step number 3, which I would like to demo the setting and getting of the image's texture, right? So basically, all I'm doing over here is that if the texture is the logo, it will change to flat, which is what it starts out with. Otherwise, it will change it to logo. So I'm just changing the image that I'm rendering for this game object, right? So that's and how to get that image. So to access it would be .texture.key, and to set it would be using the set texture. Okay, so if I actually save this now and I have this still running, basically all that means is that now if I click outside, nothing happens. But if I click on it, it will change the texture, and I can click on the texture anywhere on the texture again to change it back. So by default, so you can imagine that that's this red rectangle, the hit area, since I've changed the image and it's now larger, has grown larger with the image, basically, right? So I can click anywhere on Phaser, and that would work, right? Okay, so at the bottom here, I've commented out a bit the events we're going to listen to soon. The pointer over and out will basically be what I'll be using to switch the texture when the pointer is hovering on the button. I'll flip it to a different one, and when it's hovering out, I'll go back to the default state of the button. And similarly for pointer down and up, right? So when I click, there'll be a something visible to show the player that the button has been clicked, basically. So to do all that, I would like to create a class in which to do so. But first, put these under source, not under scenes, because they're not scenes. I will export here something called, maybe a file called asset keys. Yes. And I could export, for example, I'm not exactly sure whether it's the flat gloss or gradient, which will correspond to the default state of the button, but we'll change that later. I'll just for now use I'll just call them flat, or perhaps we could here name this the default button. This can be the hover button. And if I go to my preloader, I would like to use those for the okay, so I'll change them as necessary later. And with that, I'd like to create the class to contain the logic for our button. So I'll export class button with a constructor that will accept the phaser scene so that I'll be able to add the button to the scene. All right, so I'll import scene from phaser. And this is technically a type. You could import it as just a type. I'll assign a number. Actually, I'll do these all public also. And the reason I'm doing this is so that I don't have to stay doing this.x equals x, right, in the constructor here. To avoid having to stay assigning, I can simply give them an access modifier like public, and that way it's when TypeScript generates JavaScript, it will include this for us, for everything you've marked with an access modifier here. So I could add the public y number, right? And having done so, I could import the same three asset keys. Simply grab this line from the preloader. So I'm all set up now to basically follow the steps we outlined at the beginning of this video, which is to create a game object, an image game object, make it interactive, and then basically listen to the events on the game object. So if I go back to my button here, I will be needing the image game object. So let me just call this will be a phaser dot game object image. As a reminder, phaser, you don't even have to import it because it will be available globally thanks to the build step that it goes through when everything is running in the browser. Phaser will actually be on window, but I don't like doing that, so I will import game objects from phaser. So with that, let's start filling in our image. Can be actually this.image can be assigned to the scene.add.image. So basically straightforward, what we've seen a couple of times now. We'll simply supply the XY that we're supplying the button here. Simply pass this along. And the texture we'll be using will be the default button, right? To be seen when we actually use this in the browser, whether this is a second, of course, I am not referencing the correct path, so this would have to be same level, right? I copied this basically from the preloader. That's a problem with copy pasting. So basically, we'll see when we render this in the browser whether flat is the actual one we want to use. I have a feeling it's not. So with that, I have the image, and I want to follow the steps, right? So we want to, first of all, make the image interactive. And then I'll go ahead and paste in this chunk of code. And all I'm doing over here is the same thing we've seen, only repeated. So I am wiring up the pointer over, pointer out, pointer down, and pointer up events. And basically these are all strings, right? The first argument that I'm passing in over here to all of them, they're all some string, potentially just the last two words concatenated. So pointer over would be pointer over. And basically to get this to work, I need to import this and use it as a value over here. So I don't have type in front of this, right? And I do have the actual logic, the methods on this button class, which are missing here. So I'll be adding those now, basically. The last argument here is basically binding the contexts, so that when you're using this inside these methods, you'll bind this to what this is currently. But moving on to defining the methods, I'm going to take the same approach and basically copy paste these in because they are pretty simple methods. All I'm doing over here is changing the texture depending on what is happening, basically. I also added some console logs so that we will see this when we're running in the browser. So what do you think should happen on pointer over, right, without seeing this? When my mouse is hovering over the button, I want to set the texture to be the hover button, basically, the hover button texture. When the pointer is out, I want to clear and go back to the default button. When the pointer is down, I want to press the button. And when the pointer is up, since the pointer is up, you've pressed and you've released the mouse button, right? So you're hovering over the button. So I want to show the hover texture, basically. So if I head over to the browser and have a look at that, and actually use this button first. So I need to go to my main menu, and instead of what we're doing over here, I can bring in new button, passing in this for the scene and the width and the height. So with that, you can see that the texture is changing, but as I suspected, the images are a bit wrong. So what I have is that when I'm pressing, I see the lighter texture, and when I'm hovered out, the default is, so basically the default and the pressed are swapped. So let me go over to the preloader and change this, basically. So currently the default button is mapped to flat, whereas it should be the gradient one, and the pressed button should be the flat. So basically I just swapped these around, right? Flipped those around, basically. So now when I go back to here, I should see that the light texture is the default. When I hover over, I have that half of it is basically grayed out, and when I press, it's all grayed out. When I release, it's hovered, and when I'm out, it's basically the default. So in the console, you can see the basically this is on pointer over, pointer down, pointer up, and pointer out. Okay, so now I'd like you to try a small challenge. Basically, instead of a button, we'll try doing a checkbox now. And there's more than one alternative you could pick from here. So if you want the easy way, you can try to pick these two, for example, where you have two images, one with an empty checkbox and one with the same checkbox and the tick. So that approach will be very similar to what we've been doing, which is basically one image game object and set the texture depending on the events, right? Or else, and I'll be showing you both, you could try picking, for example, an image with the texture and an image with just the tick, right? This does not have the containing box. So when you compare these two, this one has the containing box and the tick, and this one just has the tick, right? And to help you out a bit, if you're going to choose the option where you take the one with two separate images, you could, instead of having just one game object, you could have two, but then toggle the visibility on this one, on the tick. And I'll just show you the API for that basically. So if I go to my button here and make a reference to window.myImage is equal to this image, right? So basically the game object, I'll be able to reference it in the browser just so I can show you the API. If I now do myImage.setVisible to false, the image goes away, and if I set it back to true, you'll see it back. And if I instead of setting, if I want to query the current state of visibility, I can do .visible. Okay, so that will be true. And if I set this to false, .visible will be false. Okay, so with that API, basically with those two methods of toggling visibility, you should be able to now create a checkbox class and either use the same approach I showed you with the button here, where you have one image and you set its texture, or else you'll have two separate images and then set the visibility of the check mark on and off, depending on which assets you choose, right? And I'll be showing you both ways after this.